Hello, hi, and welcome to Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Msinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. So recently, I had an amazing opportunity to be interviewed by She Speaks SA, and they called me up to talk about being a woman in the workplace, but more specifically, we were chatting about how to climb the corporate ladder and how to make it to the top. And I was a bit hesitant in the beginning because I could not entirely resonate with the topic, and maybe I had my dose of imposter syndrome in that moment. But I actually want to read a caption that I shared recently on LinkedIn about just my experience building up to this interview with Talitha van Wyk from She Speaks SA. So the caption goes, "A moment of vulnerability. I have to admit that I was quite intimidated when She Speaks SA approached me to speak on how to get to the top for their Women in the Workplace webinar series. My initial thoughts were that I'm not near where I would imagine the top to be, so how could I possibly have insight on what this is? Surely one can only speak about the top once they have made it and have the title, position, and the track record to back it up. Amid all the questioning, this reflection prompted me to think deeply about what the concept of the top actually means, and if this conventional ideas of this elusive place resonate with me. And this is what I landed on. Number one, the top is a subjective concept and means different things to different people. It's informed by one's personal values and is a personal concept of success. How one gets to the top and moves when they're at the top is very much guided by this. Number two, for me, the top is about impact, purpose, and influence that is self-emanating and self-authored. It is about deprioritizing what others expect of you and focusing on what matters to you. The top is about leading oneself first and foremost, because you cannot lead others if you cannot lead yourself. The title, position, and rank should just be an outward reflection of who and what you are in your personal capacity. And the great thing about this is that you can actually lead from right where you are with what you have. So as I close this off, I invite you to ask yourself and reflect on this question. What does the top mean for me?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, everyone out there. I am so excited for this quarter's topic that we're going to be sharing. But from our side, from She Speaks SA, welcome to tonight's conversation. We are so excited to launch this new topic and look at the various things and themes we're going to look at for the next 3 months, and all the amazing speakers we're going to have, and specifically kicking off with women in the workplace. And first of all, I'd like to encourage all of you to please share in the comment section wherever you are dialing in from. Let us know whether it's from Durban or Port Elizabeth or maybe somewhere in Europe, Australia. Please let us know where you are watching from. I know it's different times of day as well. Here in Johannesburg, it's 7 o'clock at night, and really a warm welcome to all of you out there. Also, I'd like to encourage you to please, throughout our conversation, you're welcome to add some questions that can form part of the conversation, or we will do a Q&A towards the end of this conversation. So just as a short introduction of what we are doing for these 3 months, as I mentioned, we are looking at women in the workplace. And for the month of April, we specifically asking the question, well, how do women reach the top? Or how do we move towards the top within the workplace? During the month of May, we'll be looking at imposter syndrome. And then the month of June, we will specifically look at youth empowerment, and really exciting guest speakers we're going to have throughout these 3 months. And tonight, I specifically want to welcome Mbali Mzinyane. Thank you so, so much for joining us. It's such an honor. When I met this lady for the first time, I was literally blown away by her knowledge, her experience, her insights, and the very calm and content way that she always speaks. And Mbali, I really want to, congratulate you just for the way that you present yourself. I think it's such a great way of speaking to people and connecting with people. It's really such a great trait and competency, if I may call it that. But welcome and thank you for joining us. It is a lady that is doing a lot of things and she has a lot of experience. Specifically experienced as a marketing professional. She works in the IT industry, but I am going to let her rather introduce herself and share how she sees herself, what she does, and then we'll continue the conversation from there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Talitha, and thank you to She Speaks SA for this amazing platform. I'm always excited and energized to just talk about women in the workplace and women in different spaces, really, and just participate in conversations that allow for the advancement and the promotion and empowerment of women. So yeah, as Talitha said, my name is Mbali. I am a marketing professional by way of profession, but I am also the creator and founder of Wellness in the Workplace, which is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. So the podcast itself is really just a combination of my work experiences over the years. And I delve into different workplace wellness-centered topics with different guests that come to the podcast, talking about things such as mental health, what are toxic workplaces, what do they look like, what are some of the things that people can look out for in those types of environments, talking about self-preservation, how one can preserve themselves while navigating the corporate jungle, right? Because we know that it's not an easy environment. And so it's really just about empowering and enabling women to take authorship and ownership of their journeys, and also to do so in a way that is very self-preserving and self-sustaining. And I'm a daughter, I am a sister, I'm a friend, and I am a woman's champion. I, celebrate and love all things to do with empowering women and just helping women express and find their voice, right? I think it's very important to be in spaces and to cultivate spaces that allow for a freedom of expression. And coincidentally, it is Freedom Month. So just being in spaces where one can freely express themselves and share their stories, because I do believe that, there is value in sharing one's story. Everybody deserves to be seen, to be heard, and to be validated. So that's pretty much the premise of, why I do the work that I do. It's around empowerment. It's centered around validating other people's experience, and in the process of doing that, validating my own experience, and also just making people feel seen, which is such an important thing, because that validation and that sense of security and safety in those spaces comes from that sense of belonging. So that is me in a nutshell, and that's the work that I do.
I absolutely love that. And I think that's why we also connected so well. It's really that, just women empowerment and encouragement, and really giving women out there the hope. We all go through challenges, and that's how She Speaks SA, also started. It's really
Yes.
providing women with that platform, which is why we also were so excited when we heard about your podcast, specifically looking at wellness in the workplace and fitting in so nicely with this topic that we have for the next 3 months. And I
Yes.
think, there's so much to learn from one another. I, for one, love to hear different people's perspectives and their stories and the journeys and the challenges that they've actually been able to overcome. And, by listening to those stories and giving people those platforms to share, that is really where we learn from one another, I believe. So I am so excited about your podcast as well. And I'm sure we'll during the conversation we'll also look at some of the speakers you've had and what you've learned so far from the podcast as well.
Yes.
um,
Yes.
but also recently, you are now also part of a program specifically for social development, and we want to congratulate you because it's such an honor to be chosen. I mean, it goes through a whole application process. Maybe you can just share a little bit about that program as well.
Yes, so I was recently selected as one of McKinsey's Next Generation Women's Leaders for 2023, which is an absolute privilege on my side. So what that program really is about, it's about, personal and professional development. So it is a program that runs for a number of weeks in modular phases, and, you get exposed to different topics such as personal development, personal branding, you get networking opportunities, etc., with different women from different parts of the world. So I was specifically selected for the cohort in EMEA, so that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and it's going to be virtual, for the first part of the program, and later in the coming modules, we'll be actually in person. So I'll get to be, networking, and I'll get to meet some women from McKinsey, which is a very reputable and internationally acclaimed consulting firm. So they're very big on empowering women in the workplace. They even have a report that they publish annually called Women in the Workplace, and just looking really at the different challenges that women are facing and all of the trends that come up, with women being in the workplace and trying to navigate their way through. So it is very much focused on women empowerment, very much focused on self-authorship as well, right? Equipping women with the tools, with the insights, with the relationships, with the spaces and the communities that allow them to really be in an empowered position, so that when they do step into the world of work, they step into the world of work with confidence, and they step into the world of work with intention behind why they do what they do and how they do it. So I am looking forward to it. It's a recent thing. It's kicking off next week on the 20th of April. And I'm looking forward really to the journey and to the learnings. I do believe that, you can never really stop learning, and you can never really stop investing in yourself. And for me, this is really one avenue that is going to enable me to do that.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. And, it's so powerful because I think even with women in the workplace, and even with, if you're not specifically in a workplace, we always need to be encouraged to empower ourselves the whole time for
Yeah.
that development to happen, that self-development, and for growth to happen continuously. It's so important. And the reason why we're looking at women and, reaching the top, obviously everyone has a different definition of what exactly is the top. So when we ask the question, like, how do we reach the top? What do we need to do to get there? But I think we need to stop for a second and think, but what exactly is the top? So maybe you can share, from your perspective, what do you see as the top for a woman?
Sure. I have to admit that I actually was a bit intimidated by the topic when it was first introduced to me, right? Because when you think about the top, you can't help but
think about it in the most traditional way, especially in the corporate space, right?
Yeah.
So in the most conventional way of climbing up the corporate ladder, when you think the top, you think C-level, C-suite, you think the big title, the big corner office. But when I was reflecting on it, just in preparation for our conversation, I realized that it's a very subjective thing. It means different things to different people. And it does take a degree of self-awareness to really understand what the top means for you. Because one can even say that the top is synonymous with success. So if you see success in a certain light and in a certain way, specifically in the context of the workplace, then you are likely to equate what the top is for you to that idea of success, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I think I had to just take a step back and evaluate what that means for me. And I think the things that really came to mind is that I care more about impact than I do about title. I care more about sustainability than I do about position. I care more about people and leading myself than leading other people. And I emphasize the point about leading myself because I think any form of leadership starts with charting your own path and leading yourself. And for me, in absence of the title, in absence of the position, it really just puts me at the center, and it puts my idea of what success and self-sustaining growth actually looks like. It is focused on impact, it is focused on sustainability, and it is focused on self-ownership and self-authorship. And on that basis, if it does then happen that, there is a specific role or specific title or position that allows for that, and that may give me that, I think in your post, you highlighted hierarchical visibility, then yes, I would definitely gravitate towards that. But, the questions around, is this aligned to my values? Is this aligned to my idea of success? Do I have impact? Can I be, in a position where I can sustain myself and my influence and impact within that space? And also, is it self-authored? It's not a thing that I am chasing after because, that's the social standard or that is what is expected of someone as they grow within their career. It's something that I am actively and consciously choosing because it aligns to the dreams and aspirations that I have for myself. So for me, I think the top is very much subjective, and the start of identifying what the top is for you is about understanding what success looks like for you, what happiness and joy and fulfillment actually look like for you. And then questioning if the environments, the work environments that you find yourself in are able to contribute to that idea of success.
Yeah. Absolutely. I cannot agree with you more. And, like you highlighted also, as part of my previous post earlier in the week, I also mentioned about those continuous small ripples that we can make. If making an impact is one of our high values, then those small ripples that we do on a continuous basis, for me, is much more sustainable and have a much more long-term effect than maybe one massive rock being thrown into the sea and it's got this high wave, but it's gone in like 2 or 3 seconds. And that for me is always so key. And it's so true what you are saying. Like, we as women and men need to decide what do we value in our life? What are those high values? And for some, that may be the C-suite and the corner office and the vehicle that you drive, etc., etc. And that is absolutely fine. But everyone has their own definition of those values or different values that is extremely important. And once again, I'm glad that you touched on the point of self-awareness and having that self-identity. And what I want to add to that is it doesn't come overnight. No. It doesn't come.
It definitely does not. It definitely does not. Yeah. And sometimes for some people, it actually does take them reaching that C-suite position for them to realize that that actually doesn't align with who they are. That actually doesn't
100%.
align with their values. That is not a reflection of the truth of who they are, right? And then some people get confronted with a very jarring sense of reevaluation of self to say, if I've been working all my life to get to this top position, but here I am unfulfilled, unhappy, feeling like I have no impact, and sometimes being in that position only to be seen but not heard, only to have a seat at the table, but from only a representation standpoint and not necessarily being able to influence, then that puts them in a position to then reflect on, does this truly align with who I am? Or have I then internalized what ideas of success actually look like within a work environment? And I think, the self-awareness really does help with having to identify that, so that when you even make your way through the corporate space, whether you're climbing up corporate ladder or whether you're just moving around and focusing more on specialization, the self-awareness really just does allow you to be in a space and in a place that brings forth your values, that aligns with your values, and also that just supports really the type of path and the type of person that you want to become. So I think it's so important to just do a bit of that reflective work, because for some people it actually does take them being in the corner office to realize that actually this is not what I want, not who I am. I've just internalized what ideas of success look like based on what I've seen or based on what is expected of me, and only then, once they get to that position, they realize that there's probably more to life than just my corner office.
No, absolutely. And I do want to get to the point where we look at maybe each of our journeys, where we actually started, because I think some people also think success comes overnight and success happens, and they only always see once you've kind of reached something, and then they think you're successful. But I think for everyone, the story and the journey started somewhere, And you also touched on something I want to, before we get to the stories, you also touched on leadership, which is extremely important in terms of leading ourselves, in terms of leading people around us. And I'm a firm believer of everyone actually being a leader. You don't need a corner office to be a leader. Doesn't matter where we are in society, in our community, we are all leaders. So in your view, and I see there's a question about leadership as well in the comment section, which I'll touch on now. But before we get on to that, what in your perspective is the top 3 to 5 leadership traits or competencies that you feel a leader should have?
Sure. Okay. So definitely empathy. I think empathy is a very important one, because it is an extension of the compassion you have for yourself. If you're able to be empathetic to other people, it is a reflection of how much you're able to hold space for yourself. So I think that's a very important quality, right? The second one would be around accountability. I think the second quality has to be accountability. As a leader, you have to be accountable for yourself. And maybe to just even touch on the question around how one leads themselves, it's about honoring the commitments that you make to yourself, even in the privacy of your own home when no one is there to hold you accountable. So you need to be able to hold yourself accountable. And I think someone who is able to hold themselves accountable can then be held accountable by others. So then it means that, you're not afraid to be corrected. It means that you are in a position to be teachable and to be receptive to feedback if you practice that value of accountability. Then the third one, I think, is around adaptability, which is something that we previously touched on. Because, with the changing external environments, I think it's very important for a leader to be able to be responsive to the changes around them. And part of them being responsive is that, quality of being adaptable to changes within the external environment or even internal environment. And that's where things such as situational leadership comes into play, right? Being able to access when and how, can I apply what type of leadership style for the specific situation, and the quality that underlines the ability to be able to do that is adaptability, is being versatile, is being dynamic. So I think I would just leave it at those three. The first one being empathy, because empathy to others is a reflection of empathy to self. Accountability. And if you're an accountable person, you can be accountable for your shortcomings. And that is, for me, a reflection of someone who is receptive to feedback, someone who is teachable. And then lastly, it would be around adaptability. You have to be responsive to the different changes within your environment, and also to the different people that you work with, right? Being able to adjust and apply yourself situationally based on the context that you find yourself in. So I would leave it at those three.
I love those. It actually, takes so much in those three words. There's actually so much included in that. We can write 3 different chapters in a book on those.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, because there's just so many underlying qualities as well that bring those to the surface, right? And I think in absence of the underlying qualities, for example, with accountability, like I said, you have to be teachable. You have to be a teachable spirit to be able to be accountable for anything. And that in and of itself can actually be a quality and a trait to highlight that one, should have as a leader.
Absolutely. Because, within all of those, there's trust, there's the open and growth mindset. To this day, I literally still learn things every single day. And I do believe it's because if you are open for different perspectives, if you are open to, and you don't necessarily have to adjust or change how you feel about something or how you think about something, but just to be able to realize that there are different ways of doing something, or there are different ways of seeing something. It's not just my own way or how I was brought up. There are different ways. It's not just one way that can happen. And I think that is so important as a leader, to be able to listen very carefully. So obviously that fits into that. Is really listening to understand, and as I always say, instead of just listening to respond. So that for me is also very, very important. And I think to add on to, the question that came from the audience is, how does one lead themselves, or really that self-identity, and growing, reading, listening to podcasts. Please listen to Mbali's Wellness in the Workplace. By you leading yourself just by listening to that, because you can learn so much from it. But really, empowering yourself, and whether that's from listening, whether that's from learning. These days there are so many courses that you can be a part of, and programs that you can do, qualifications you can do, short learning programs to also lead yourself in that way. I believe that's all part of leadership, and reading books. Like I always say, and people sometimes when they walk into my home, they ask me, well, have you read all the books that you actually have? But then a very good friend of mine told me that, what, it reminds her of all the books she has. It reminds her that she doesn't know everything yet. So she hasn't read all of them. But that's how I see it. I think there's so much to learn out there and to empower ourselves with, that you can literally do something different every day that you can learn from and lead yourself in that.
Agreed.
And learning something from yourself, thinking of the things you've gone through in life and what you've learned through that, and how one can implement or use that in future. I think that is so important.
Yeah. Definitely, the point around learning speaks to adaptability, right? I think in
100%.
order for you to be able to be adaptable and dynamic, there has to be that willingness to learn, that willingness to do things differently. And so I think it's such an important point to highlight, and it could actually even be a separate trait on its own. That can be highlighted, that, learning really does help with also just your self-awareness, which goes back to, the initial point that we spoke about, that, the self-awareness is really just the driver on how you move and how you show up in the spaces that you show up in. And that takes a level of curiosity about yourself, curiosity about the environments around you, right? And in you being curious, then that's where the learning comes into play, and that's where you then acquire the skills to then become adaptable and dynamic and being teachable in different situations.
Absolutely. And something that's coming out more to the front is not just having IQ and looking at EQ, but now also looking at the adaptability quotient, your AQ. So it's something I'm reading up a lot about and doing research on, which I'm extremely excited about. But and that's a whole new topic. We can have a whole different conversation just on that.
Yeah.
But absolutely, adaptability being so crucial. So coming back to, if we think of, I think, societal kind of terms in terms of working our way to the top, and maybe even, up to where we are today. And I know for both of us, making an impact is so important. But if we think of where we are today, like, where did we start? So where did your journey kind of start? In the terms of the workplace?
Sure. My journey started a really long time ago, but it started as a very curious and enthusiastic young professional, right? And I think when I did start out, I had a very narrow ideas in terms of what success is, and that was me internalizing the ideas of success that I had seen from different people. So my journey, I think, started by being in spaces and wanting to then influence those spaces, but from a place that wasn't necessarily self-authored. And like I said, it was, very much about internalizing what I had seen. So I actually started in a different industry. I was in the media space. And then at some points, I managed to pivot into technology, into the IT space via a graduate program. And, having to be in a graduate program and having that, high visibility within the organization definitely does put a bit of pressure on someone, to always put their best foot forward, specifically because there is that level of visibility and there is that expectation that as a graduate, you have been selected on the basis of, I guess maybe your ability to communicate. You have been selected on your intellect, and then feeling now the pressure to always having to prove that in different engagements that you have throughout the business. And that is mistake number one. Every interaction and every engagement within a work environment shouldn't be an opportunity to prove your worth. It should be about, like you said, listening to understand and listening to understand how and where you can add value, as opposed to it being about, look at me, see what I can do. Because I think that, within the corporate environment, a lot of the interactions and engagement can be masked around, people's egos, right? Where you end up engaging with a person's ego as opposed to being engaging with them, with the true self, So And so, it did take hitting the wall a couple of times on my part to realize that, no, maybe this is not how I want to be. Maybe this is not how I want to conduct myself, within the space. Maybe I want to be a lot more true to who I am. And obviously that then comes with that self-awareness, that self-reflection, leaning on the feedback around you to say, okay, where do you think my strengths are? Where do you think my areas of improvement are? And then taking all of that feedback into really then just intentionally cultivate that sense of self, and then from that develop a personal brand of some sort that you can carry with you throughout the different workspaces that you've been in. And quite early actually on in my career, I did experience a terrible case of workplace bullying, and I've spoken about it a couple of times on the podcast to say that that was actually the inspiration behind the podcast, because the platform for me is something that I wish I had when I was going through that, quite early on in my career, because what the podcast for me does is that it gives language and context to some of the challenges that we face. We may find ourselves in our roles quite frustrated, thinking that we work with difficult managers or difficult personalities, when in actual fact you're sometimes just working with a bully, right? And if you don't have the context and the understanding of what is really happening, then it's easy to misplace and to mislabel your experience. So my early journey was filled with a lot of that, pretty much like shedding all of these misconceptions of what I thought, success looks like in the workplace, or what I thought how I needed to show up in the workplace, or just the reality, being confronted with the reality of being in a corporate environment, that it isn't just about working hard, to get to the top, or to even maintain your position within the workplace. There are other things that you need to consider, soft skills, hard skills that come with the aptitude and the technical ability and technical know-how within the work environment. But then there's also then the softer side of things, like working on your personal brand, like communication, like leveraging relationships around you so that you can find mentors and potentially sponsors to help you navigate that environment and ultimately put you in a position where you can actually advance your career. So all of these learnings for me have literally been trial and error. I did not have a handbook or a guideline of some sort that I could refer to, and I could take down all of these notes and then I put them into practice. It really just took having to make the mistakes myself, having to be burnt a few times, and getting up again and looking for that confidence, and then redefining who I am for myself and how it is I want to show up within the workplace. And then now cultivating, I guess, the person that you are seeing today. And even though there's been so much progress that has been done from the time that I've started all the way to now, I'm still nowhere near where I want to be. And that for me is what makes this journey exciting, right? And even having conversations around what exactly does the top look like for me, in preparation for this discussion, it's definitely, a thought that I was ruminating over quite a bit, because it has changed significantly from the Mbali who was the graduate, fresh out of, university, very excited, very eager, and had a very misconceived and misplaced idea of what it takes to actually survive and thrive in the corporate space, versus now where experience has taught me better, where experience has opened up my eyes, has opened up my ears, and has opened me up to a world of possibilities of how else I can show up in the workplace without having to lose myself in the process. So that answers where I've started and where I am right now. Lots of trial and error, lots of mistakes, lots of learning, and lots of moments of just having to confront self, having to confront the self to say, is this who you are? Or is this how you want to show up? Is this where you want to be? How is this environment enabling you to get to where you want to be, and how then can you navigate this space, while preserving yourself, and like I said, not losing yourself in the process, because I think that's such an important aspect to highlight on. When you enter these work environments, there is that pressure, to conform. There is that pressure to assimilate to the culture within the organization, and sometimes that assimilation comes with a loss of self. That assimilation comes with, compromising and even suppressing some of your values and your opinions about certain things. And it's so then, to be aware of where that happens and how it happens, so that you don't wake up one day and you're sitting in that corner office, but you don't even, have a good sense of grounding, because you've compromised all of your values and your sense of self throughout just to get to the top.
Absolutely. And that is so important. And as as you're talking about the learning curves and the experiences, what comes to mind for me, what's always so important, and what I always encourage young people to do is, just at least start somewhere, because everything you do, you will be learning some sort of skill. And I've added it to my post as well. I started out as a waitress, and what that taught me is to get better people skills, to communicate better, to be able to work with conflict, and managing that. So in every single thing, in every area you go, and how you work your way up, there's gonna be skill development wherever you go. So I always encourage people to, if there's an opportunity, grab it, but without 100%, as you say, without devaluing yourself at the end of the day, which is very important. There are such good questions coming through. And I want to start with one which specifically, because you touched on you've experienced workplace bullying. And I want to start with a question that's asking, how do you overcome workplace bullying, before I get to the rest?
Oh, that's a very, very difficult one. It's a very difficult thing to try and navigate, especially, with the pressures of having to maintain your job, with the pressures of having to still show up to work and to be expected to perform and operate at a certain level, right? I think it's important, number one, to identify if what you are going through is really a case of workplace bullying, right? And how you would typically qualify that is if you are experiencing this type of isolated, targeted treatment in different situations and repeatedly over a certain period of time. So if there's a sense of isolation whenever you're in social settings with either your manager or potentially sometimes even a colleague, if you are being excluded from important meetings, you're not being considered, in terms of just the sharing of information and resources to allow you to do your job as effectively as possible. Those are some of the things that you need to look out for. And sometimes it can actually be quite overt and explicit, where someone says unkind things to you as a means of humiliating you or embarrassing you or just targeting you for whatever reason. So those are the things to really just be mindful of. And if those things happen over a period of time and repeatedly by the same person, and specifically to you, and sometimes it could be to other people, because I think there can be a tendency to mislabel what could be performance management, for example, as workplace bullying. Just because a manager is asking you for feedback on certain project, is asking for updates, and is putting you in an uncomfortable position where you have to constantly be providing feedback, and then you might see that as a form of targeting or a form of bullying. So I think it's important to be very mindful of just those nuances, because there are subtle differences, but the thing that is consistent in the case of workplace bullying, for example, is mistreatment. And it could come in various forms. It could come in various forms, which I've highlighted. And I mean, those are some examples, but they're not limited to that. And so in terms of just overcoming it, I think there is managing it as opposed to overcoming it. So overcoming would either mean you leave the organization or move to a different team, or the person who is bullying you leaves. Because one thing that a bully, and as you would know from, childhood playgrounds, that a bully doesn't change, because there is a sense of pleasure that they derive from having to target and mistreat people. So instead of trying to change them, it's important to change yourself. And in changing yourself, it entails you managing that relationship with the said bully. So, if it means having to communicate your boundaries repeatedly, which is mentally and emotionally exhaustive. But if it means having to communicate that, to say, this is what you said, or this is how you said it, and I actually didn't like it. Can you just be mindful of your tone or how you speak to me? Or if it's a case of you being excluded from meetings, from emails that are important, having to then also just rely on, the support around you to be able to just, help you manage that situation. That's very important, having that support and allyship, people that can also just vouch for you and people that can validate your experience, because sometimes you might actually think that it's all in your head, right? You might actually think that maybe I'm overreacting, maybe I'm being too sensitive, maybe, I'm the one who's having a bad day, or maybe she was having a bad day. Having then that support system around you, those allies that you can confide in, that you trust, they can help you validate that experience. They can help you then say, actually, what you are going through is valid and something can be around it, And I think in terms of some remediation around it, having to get HR involved, even though I'm very tentative with having to make that recommendation, but having to get HR involved, especially when you are confident about your level of trust for a specific, let's say a business partner, an HR business partner, having to get them involved, I think is very important, because there needs to be some form of record keeping, documentation that you may have to, just so that you can protect yourself within that environment. It sucks that you would have to be, very hyper vigilant, making sure that every conversation is followed up by an email, making sure that every uncomfortable interaction or mistreatment is then documented somewhere, so that you are keeping records of those incidents of mistreatment, so that should you then decide to log a formal grievance, and should you decide to take on a formal grievance process, you at least have reference, you at least have some record that you can then show within that instance, when you do reach out to an HR business partner, for example, to just assist in some form of intervention and remediation. So it is mentally and emotionally exhausting. It is something that can really just work on your self-confidence, your self-esteem. And so it's so important that once you've identified it, you put in the measures to manage it. And what I do suggest, which will always be my suggestion, if you are in a toxic work environment or experiencing a case of workplace bullying, is to plan your exit strategy. That is so important. I know, a lot of people don't have the luxury of just quitting their jobs because of financial and family responsibilities that are dependent on, your salary, but it's important to, create then some form of exit plan or exit strategy that would allow you to then, be in a space that at least is better for your mental and emotional well-being. So, an exit exit strategy could either be leaving and moving into another team if it's maybe a specific manager that you can't work with, or it could even potentially be leaving and working in a completely different company altogether. And understandably so, when you are in an emotionally and mentally exhausted position, having to then go through a whole, job searching and interviewing process is a lot of work. And that can also take a toll on you. But it is at least something that one person can look forward to, in it as a means of motivation and encouragement to get out of a situation that is actually trampling your mental and emotional well-being. So just, finding very practical management strategies around managing that relationship with the bully or perpetrator, getting some form of intervention from an HR perspective, and making sure that there is, record keeping from a grievance process. So if you want to log a formal grievance with the said individual, and then thirdly, planning some form of exit strategy so that you at least able to then position yourself to be in an environment where you can then, look after yourself emotionally and mentally, and then be able to perform as optimally as you can.
No, that's great. Thank you, Mbali. And I think, one thing that a friend of mine actually asked before is, if you're in such a situation, but then the HR is actually, I almost want to say, friends with the bully,
Oof.
like it's almost like you have to skip step 2 that you mentioned.
Yeah, that is tough, and it typically is the case, right? Because what you do find in cases with bullies is that they typically become everybody else's favorite, and it makes it very difficult then to validate your experience with them, or to even then get buy-in from other people in terms of what you are experiencing yourself. I think then that's where it's important to have allies, which is a point that I actually did not include in just my summary. Having that support system around you, especially, let's say, if you're working in a team and there are other people within the team who can see, this case of bullying, or who have potentially even experienced it themselves. Having that support system does help in terms of just, helping you preserve your mental and emotional well-being. But above all, I think just putting together, an exit plan, an exit strategy that's just going to allow you to be in a space where you can then, be in a mentally and emotionally healthier place, so that you can still show up in the workplace, so that you can recover your self-confidence and can recover your self-esteem, because it's really not sustainable in the long run. You can manage it, but you might not be able to overcome it.
Yeah, no, absolutely agreed. And I think for the management part, it's also, and it's not easy, but just for that time being where you just have to manage it. I think it's so important to also find things that will keep you mentally healthy, and whether that is a healthy lifestyle in terms of exercise, in terms of eating right, in terms of, having your allies and your support system or your community, all those things, just to, kind of get you through that management stage, if I can call it that. Because I know, as you mentioned, it's not easy for some people. An exit strategy might take them a very long time. And for that time, especially, it's so important to, in yourself, make sure that you put some things in place to keep that mental health within that period of time.
Definitely. Absolutely.
Sorry, I know we're starting to run out of time, and I just want to look at these other two. There's so much we can talk about.
Yes.
But the one says, thank you for the show and the topic. I'm a Black woman in a male-dominated company that's more white males. How would you advise to work my way to a promotion within the company? Because
Sure.
they don't always see my skill, but my race first. I
Oof.
think this is quite a common question and a common situation that we find ourselves in.
Sure. So I was actually reading an article, I think about a week or two ago, by the Harvard Business Review, and it was just talking about some of the key challenges that groups who have been previously marginalized or are minority groups within the workplace actually face, right? So it is access to opportunities or the lack thereof. It is the constant scrutiny and, constantly having to prove yourself and prove that you are competent, you are capable, and also just your voice not being heard, where you are seen but you're not heard. You have a seat at the table but you have no influence. And it's so interesting because this is something that happens at all levels, right? Especially within, like I said, groups that have been previously marginalized or disadvantaged and have very much recently entered the workforce, or white collar work, as they call it. It is very difficult. It is very difficult, to navigate your way in a space where you are underrepresented or misrepresented. And I emphasize on the point of misrepresented because of the biases that people have to overcome, right? The unconscious bias that, the people that you interact with, that cloud their ability to connect with you as an individual and see your skill for what it is, as opposed to the stereotypes and the perception and mindset that they have about a young Black woman who maybe comes from Soweto, for example. So it is a lot of self-awareness, once again, that comes into play. So that you don't actually internalize the feedback that you're getting. I think it's easy to then internalize that feedback and then to think that there's something inherently wrong with you, to think that there's something that you need to fix about yourself, or you then need to now conform and assimilate to a certain culture so that you can be seen. But for me, in moments where you are challenged in that way, that is an opportunity for you to be more of yourself. That is an opportunity for you to be more authentic and to be more true to yourself in that moment. And if you allow that sense of insecurity and fear to then dictate how you should be, then you're selling yourself short. Then you're limiting your ability, to truly show up in the workplace and to make that impact and to enforce, some form of change. So I do think that it's very important to consider just the self-preservation more than anything, and in so doing, then tap into your authenticity. Again, I'll come to the point around allyship. I'll come to the point around allyship because that is when you identify people who can be in your corner. Community building is so important. And in spaces where, you are part of the minority, or you are part of a group who has been previously marginalized within that environment, finding allies is so important. And mind you, allies are not only that look like you. Allies could be someone that looks completely different than you, but because you have a shared value system with that individual, you are able to connect with them and they are able to see you beyond the surface level, beyond your race, beyond your age, beyond your gender. And also another point around allyship is the role of then mentorship, and lastly sponsorship. So I'll speak to then mentorship in the sense that there are people who have been in these positions before we were in these positions. There are people who have positions in male-dominated industries that look like us, and I think this then presents an opportunity to reach out to those kinds of people to say, what did you do in this position? how did you manage? How did you survive? What can I learn from your journey that maybe I'm not aware of in my journey and in this moment? And I think that's where mentorship can really just help in terms of elevating a person, and in terms of just, putting that individual up for, a better position, up to in a potential position to be promoted. And the role of sponsorship also comes into play as well. Sponsorship, having somebody to vouch for you in rooms where you are not present, having somebody to vouch for you, where you can't speak for yourself, that can also help in promoting and advancing your careers, specifically in environments where, you are a minority group, or you are women in a male-dominated industry. So I would definitely say, the self-preservation, self-awareness, which has been a consistent theme in our discussion tonight, is very important. And then secondly, the allyship, the mentorship, as well as the sponsorship can really, really just help. But also just being aware of the dynamics of your environment is so, so important, because I can't believe I'm about to say this, but the corporate space can tend to be like a game. It can tend to be like a game. And the reason why I bring that up is because you have to be aware of how then to navigate this game, this ecosystem, in a way that, once again, does not compromise your authenticity and does not compromise the truth of who you are. So I'll leave that there. I hope it answers the question.
No, absolutely wonderful. And I think for me, always, showing up with confidence that you have that skill, that you can do it. And I think that comes with the self-awareness that you mentioned as well. And obviously hard work, adds to that as well. All of those things. I mean, this can be a total conversation on its own. The last one I want to mention is, someone said, you mentioned about losing yourself. I'm the breadwinner at home and feel like I have lost myself. How does one find themselves again when I fear losing my job if I do not conform?
Sure. That's a very big question. So I think, in terms of losing oneself, it comes with a loss of confidence, right? And so the starting point to regain confidence, which is actually something I was sharing with a mentee earlier this week, is doing things that you are good at, raising your hands for things that you're good at. If you know that you're good at presentations, if you know that you're good at analyzing things and putting reports together, gravitate more towards the things that will restore your sense of confidence. And in the process of doing that, it at least gives you, some knowing and confirmation about your skill set and your abilities when it comes to a certain task. And I think, in restoring that confidence, it will then allow you to then take on other things that would give you a lot more assurity in your abilities, your competencies, and in your skill set. So I think the loss of self, for me, can easily be equated to a loss of confidence. And how you regain confidence is by doing things that you are good at. Confidence is actually a skill. It's not a trait. I actually came across a video recently that emphasized that point, and I think we tend to forget that. Right? So it's so important to, work on building that skill and that muscle to be confident, so that you can then walk into a meeting, a boardroom, a one-on-one session with your manager, knowing that this is what I'm good at, this is what I'm capable of, and this is the most value that I bring to, the team. So I think gaining confidence starts there. Then the second part is around working on those fears, right? I think when you work from a place of fear and insecurity, it's not the most optimal place for one to do things that are going to help them thrive or even survive within a corporate environment, right? And that does take a lot of, inner work to understand where those fears come in, to understand why you have those fears and what are the drivers behind those fears. And I understand that a lot of those fears in most cases are related to a person's livelihood, a person's survival. So if I don't have my salary at the end of the month, my family won't eat. And that is a real thing. That is a real thing. And it becomes very difficult to step out of that kind of fear when one is experiencing that. But I do think that, as a way to mitigate it, instead of completely overcome it, because it does take a lot of, inner work, a lot of self-reflection, etc., to be in you are not driven or motivated by fear. But as a starting point, that restoration of confidence, that restoration in knowing that, you are good at a specific task, you are capable at a specific thing, and building up then that confidence as a means to manage and to mitigate your fears could be a really good starting point.
No, absolutely. I think Mbali has just gone into load shedding. She did mention earlier that she's having load shedding at 8. So I think that's exactly what happened. So, but from our side, there's so many things we can still mention, so many things we can still talk about around women in the workplace. And I do want to encourage you to please post those questions still on our social media platforms, She Speaks SA, so we can also address that, and whether that's offline or in another space. But please post those questions for us. We will try our best to answer them, and we're definitely going to have more conversations around this. In 2 weeks' time, we're having another great guest speaker. We're also going to have some male speakers coming up to get their perspective around women in the workplace. So please join us in 2 weeks' time again. And I think we need to get Mbali back very soon as a guest speaker again to continue this conversation, because there's just so much to talk about. Please also, for tonight's conversation, if you found it very valuable, please share it with everyone that you know. It will be available on LinkedIn, on Facebook, as well as on our YouTube channel. So please share that. Or if you want to maybe listen in case you missed something, you want to listen to it later again, please do so. And make sure to follow us on all the platforms, and also welcome to visit our website. We'll also share the details about Mbali and also her podcast on women in the workplace and wellness in the workplace. So you can also have a listen to that. Thank you for that comment that just came in. Amazing discussion. This is definitely what we need to be discussing in order to get ahead and realign ourselves. Absolutely. And we are having more and more discussions of that throughout the next 3 months and also throughout this year. But also have a look out on our posts. On our posts, we also share some journeys of other women and what they've experienced in the workplace, and also some ideas of how to go about that. So please have a look out for all of those. Have a look at our posts. Some of them are going to be educational as well. So please just have a look out, share your ideas, share your questions. We would love to engage with you. So to everyone out there, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a privilege, and I'm already looking forward to our next conversation. So have a fantastic evening or day. If you're in another place, we will see you soon. Goodbye.